Okay, hi students. I'm going to review ideas for essay option 2. The question is, this semester we learned about the covenant relationship into which God has invited the people of Israel. Part A, describe, summarize what this covenant relationship looks like in salvation history. What has God done or promised to do for Israel? What response has God invited Israel to make? And then part B, what might we learn about our own relationship with God today by our own prayerful reflection on this relationship of God and Israel? What do we hope for from God today? What responsibilities to God and to one another do we have in order to respond to God's invitation to us to be in covenant relationship with Him? Give at least one concrete example from the various parts of our lives in our homes and families, in our school community, and in society in the world at large. So this is a difficult question to outline because it's ultimately deeply personal. And so I'm going to do my best to give you some ideas. So the first part says, describe, summarize what this relationship looks like in salvation history. What has God done and promised to do for Israel? What response to God is Israel invited to make? So in terms of answering this part of the question, this is looking at the broad scope of the covenant relationship, unlike the other question, the short answer, which was more about looking at the nuts and bolts of individual covenants. So the first thing we have to tackle here is the question of what is salvation history. So salvation history is a term that we use to refer to God's saving action in human history. So in other words, it's how God acts in history to bring about our salvation. And the whole purpose of covenant relationship is to bring about our salvation by partnering with human beings, which is a really lovely and unique thing. Then the last thing I might say is we have to point out that we do need salvation. Why do we need salvation? It's to save us from original sin. And this is a Christian concept. It's not something you'll find in Judaism. So this is a unique interpretation of the covenant from a Christian perspective. So the other aspect of the question, we had the idea that God has promised to use the covenant as a means of achieving our salvation by partnering with us. So He's going to interact in human history, partner with individual people. You might give an example, like initiating the covenant with Abraham, or how He brings us the law through Moses. The next part says, so He's promised to save Israel. God also promises to care for Israel as their God. He says that in the covenant with Abraham. He gives them the law as a guide in the covenant, as a guide to right relationship with Himself and others. And ultimately, He promises that Israel will always endure through the Davidic covenant. And as Christians, we see the ultimate fulfillment of all the covenant promises will be realized in the saving work of Jesus Christ. So again, this is a Christian interpretation of the covenant promise. Israel is invited into a loving, reciprocal partnership with God. And again, this is unique. You don't see this before Judaism. You don't see any of the ancient gods acting this way. They're capricious. Humans are just their slaves or playthings. God here invites us into a loving reciprocal partnership, and he invites us to work together with him to bring about our salvation, to bring us back to Eden, to make us what we were truly meant to be. And the best metaphor for this is a marriage. Just like we take vows in a marriage, we make promises to God, and he makes promises to us, and that's what covenant is. Covenant is about being in this right relationship with God, and we know we're in right relationship when we honor our part of the deal. And so all this is about giving a broad overview of what the covenant relationship means. The next part is to apply this to your own personal faith. So part B, what might we learn about our relationship with God today by our own prayerful reflection on this relationship of God and Israel? What do we hope for from God? What responsibilities to God and one another do we have in response to God's invitation? Give examples from the various parts of our lives. So this is hard to outline because it's ultimately deeply personal. You're looking at your relationship with God through the lens of covenant. And there's a couple approaches that you could take. One that I thought of is looking at the idea of covenant as right relationship. So all of the covenants call us into right relationship with God and with one another. What does right relationship look like in our home and our families, in our school community, and in society at large? And what do the covenants teach us about that? Another way you might go at it is look at themes from the various covenants and apply those to either you could do broad themes or specific teachings from the various covenants that we could draw out and apply these to these different aspects of our lives. So let's look at right relationship. In our homes, in our families, what does right relationship look like, and what does the covenant teach us about that? So one way we could look at this is the covenant teaches us that right relationship means being in communion with one another, and that we partner with God, and this is mirrored in below. We're in the image of God, right? Below in our family life. Think about the example of the 10 Commandments, to honor thy father and mother. What does that look like in your own home? So give an example of being in right relationship in the home. And, what does it look like when you're in right relationship with your parents? What does it look like when you're not? Think of maybe even the examples of the Abrahamic families. What does it look like when the examples from the Bible are in right relationship with each other, like when Jacob and Esau reconcile, whereas when they're fighting? If you were looking at different themes from the covenants and different teachings from the covenants, it would depend on what covenant you were looking at, but thinking of the covenant with, let's see, what would be a theme? So that would be right relationship. Teachings of individual covenants, maybe that's where you bring in the example of the fifth commandment or fourth commandment to honor the parents. In a school setting, you could talk about how it means you respect your teachers. So that might be how you could bring in that with home and family. In our school community, again, ask the question, what does right relationship mean at SF? So how you treat your sisters, how you treat your teachers, and looking at the themes from the covenant, the theme of partnership. I think, how is that reflected in the sisterhood of St. Francis? How is the idea that God works with us reflected in the idea of the sisterhood of St. Francis? Now, it's difficult for me to even talk about that because I didn't go to a school like this. So you'd have to come up again. And here's the thing, you need to give really concrete examples. For the last part, in our society, in our world, thinking about right relationship and thinking about like the parallels with the Bible, from Cain and Abel, we learned that we are our brothers and sisters keepers. And so this brings us to questions about social justice. One area that for a very specific example that concerns me personally is the issue of the migrants. They haven't been in the news cycle lately, but the migrants who are seeking asylum at our southern border, people coming up from South America. And as Americans, we have to ask the question, how do we treat these people? And from my Catholic understanding of that I get from the Jewish covenant with God, I know that I am called by God to treat everybody as the image of God. I know that God calls me to treat everybody with human dignity, that I'm a partner with these people. I am my brother's keeper. And that makes me ask the question, what is my responsibility? How can I help these immigrants? Think about our Advent giving program. Maybe by learning about the fact that you're in relationship with God and in a communion, that calls us to communion with those students who are in the hospital. And maybe it motivated you to reach out and give them a gift. Why do we act like this as Christians? It's all about this idea of relationship. Being in God is being in relationship with Him, and that motivates us to be in relationship with everyone because He's the ultimate creator, so we're all brothers and sisters. In terms of different themes, you definitely, from the covenant with Noah, since it's a covenant ultimately with creation, and God calls us to care for creation, this could be something that motivates you to, I know at least for myself, this motivates me to do specific acts to take care of the environment. I know in my own life, just simple little things like recycling, not buying water bottles, to using a reusable water bottle. Part of the reason why I've always done this in my life is because I see that creation is a gift. It's something that's been given to me by God. It's not mine. It's something that I steward for the next generation. And again, you might find other ways to look at that. A theme I just thought of for possibly in the Noah covenant and also in the Mosaic covenant, you have the theme of God's justice and God's mercy. What would that look like in a family? Maybe when your sister does something that makes you mad, maybe instead of reacting angrily, you show her mercy. In your school community, the theme of justice and mercy, maybe a teacher makes a mistake on a grade. Now, obviously, justice demands the teacher fixes it, but maybe when you tell the teacher about it, you look at the teacher with compassion and mercy. Don't be accusatory. Be, I think you may have made a mistake. It's not a big deal. Just could you fix it when you get the time? Also, in terms of justice and mercy, treating the staff with compassion and mercy. I often notice when I'm in the kitchen that when students pay the bill for their food, they call the kitchen staff by their names. They treat them with respect. They say please, they say thank you. And that's about being in right relationship again. Covenant is about relationship. So those are some ideas for this option. I hope these are helpful for you. Please do, again, think of specific examples as you're studying, because that's going to be the key to writing a good, strong paragraph, or paragraphs, that is. Thanks. If you have any questions or you need any help, just let me know.